My fiancée mocked my career in front of her entire office. She thought I'd just laugh it off, but what I did next ended everything she'd built. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. You know that kind of silence where everyone's watching but no one says a thing? That was the room when Madison looked straight at me, drink in hand, and said, "Oh Nolan, he's just a mechanic. But like, a really passionate one. He talks about engines the way normal people talk about dreams." The laughter wasn't loud, but it was enough. Heads tilted, eyes flicked over me like I was a curiosity in a museum. Someone even chuckled into their glass. I smiled, my jaw ached from holding it there. She kept going. I mean, bless his heart. Grease under his nails. Every day. I guess someone has to keep our cars running. Right? Her coworker Trevor shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. I caught that. I also caught Madison giving him a little shrug. Like, lighten up, it's just a joke. But here's the thing, it wasn't a joke. Not from her. I've seen the way she avoids telling her friends what I do. How she says he works with cars instead of he's a mechanic. Like the word itself is contagious. So I did what no one expected. I set my drink down, stood up, looked her straight in the eye, and I said, loud enough for every head to turn, "If my work embarrasses you that much, Madison, maybe you should find someone else to brag about." I took off the ring, put it on the table, and walked out. I could feel the weight of 50 pairs of eyes on my back. Not one person followed me. When I got to my truck, my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the keys. I sat there, engine off, just staring at the dash. The smell of oil and rubber in the cab felt more like home than that whole damn party ever did. My phone buzzed. Madison. I didn't answer. She called again, then the text started. "Nolan, it was just a joke. You're embarrassing yourself. We need to talk before you make it worse." Make it worse. Like I'd somehow ruined her night. I drove aimlessly for an hour before ending up at the shop. It was late. The bay doors closed. The place quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge in the corner. I flicked on the lights and just stood there, surrounded by the smell of grease, the familiar outlines of cars on lifts, my tools lined up exactly how I liked them. People think fixing cars is just turning wrenches. They don't get that it's diagnosing, listening for problems most folks can't hear. Remembering the way a healthy engine feels through your fingertips. It's a craft, my craft, and the woman I was about to marry treated it like a punchline. Around midnight, I finally headed home. Madison's car was in the driveway. The living room light was on. When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch in one of those silk blouses she wears to work. Hair still perfect. Makeup rich out. "Nolan," she started, her voice soft but rehearsed. "You humiliated me tonight." I laughed. Short, sharp, funny. I was thinking the same thing. Her eyes narrowed just a little, the first crack in her perfect corporate mask. That's when I knew tonight wasn't over. Madison didn't raise her voice. She never does. That's part of her thing. Stay composed. Stay above it all. "You could have just pulled me aside," she said, sipping her wine like we were at some civil negotiation instead of in the middle of our engagement crumbling. "Pulled you aside? In front of your friends who now think I'm some charity project?" I asked, her lips pressed together. "That I'm not wrong. You're just being emotional." "Look, she's mastered. You're overreacting. Everyone knows you're good with your hands." I was just lightening the mood. That line stuck in my head. Everyone knows. The next morning, I stopped by the diner before opening the shop. That's where Trevor, her coworker, walked in. He spotted me in a booth, hesitated, then slid into the seat across from me. No small talk. "I'm sorry about last night," he said quietly. "She's been making those comments for months, mostly at work. You weren't supposed to hear it." My stomach dropped. "Months, not a one-off. She's been talking about me." He nodded. "It's always about how you settled where you are. How you could have done more if you'd, I don't know, tried harder. Tried harder. Like putting in 12-hour days at a shop you built from nothing doesn't count." Trevor glanced around, lowering his voice. "Look, she even joked in a meeting that you'd probably never be able to afford the kind of life she's aiming for. I'm telling you because it's not right. And honestly, I'm tired of her getting away with it." He slid a business card across the table. Madison's department name, the company logo. "There's a networking event next week. Might want to be there." I stared at that card, something cold settling in my chest. This wasn't over. That business card burned a hole in my pocket all week. I kept pulling it out, turning it over in my hands, imagining the look on Madison's face if I showed up where she didn't expect me. By Thursday, I'd made up my mind. The networking event was in one of those rooftop bars downtown, the kind with $12 cocktails and bartenders who look like they've stepped out of a magazine. I cleaned up, but I didn't dress corporate. Dark jeans, button-up leather jacket, still me, just sharper. When I walked in, the place buzzed with polite laughter and clinking glasses. I spotted Madison instantly. She was in a sleek navy dress, holding court near the bar, smiling like she owned the skyline. Her voice carried, and so did the words. "Nolan, oh, he's great, but he's more small town, happy in his little bubble. You know, some people don't need ambition." I stopped mid-step. She said it so easily, so confidently, like she's rehearsed it. A few people chuckled. One guy gave a sympathetic awe like I was a dog that didn't know it couldn't win best in show. I didn't go up to her. Not yet. I drifted through the crowd, listening. Every introduction Madison made included some version of my job. Each one spun to sound a little less impressive. At one point, she didn't even call me a mechanic. She called me a local handyman for cars. The thing was, she wasn't just joking, she was branding me. To her colleagues, I was a prop, the humble, grease-stained partner that made her look even more polished. Trevor caught my eye from across the room. He gave the smallest nod, like, "You hearing this?" Oh, I heard it, and I was already planning my next move. That business card burned a hole in my pocket all week. I kept pulling it out, turning it over in my hands, imagining the look on Madison's face if I showed up where she didn't expect me. By Thursday, I'd made up my mind. The networking event was in one of those rooftop bars downtown, the kind with $12 cocktails and bartenders who look like they've stepped out of a magazine. I cleaned up, but I didn't dress corporate. Dark jeans, button-up leather jacket, still me, just sharper. When I walked in, the place buzzed with polite laughter and clinking glasses. I spotted Madison instantly. She was in a sleek navy dress, holding court near the bar, smiling like she owned the skyline. Her voice carried, and so did the words, "Nolan, oh, he's great. But he's more small town, happy in his little bubble. You know, some people don't need ambition." I stopped mid-step. She said it so easily, so confidently, like she's rehearsed it. A few people chuckled. One guy gave a sympathetic "oh," like I was a dog that didn't know it couldn't win best in show. I didn't go up to her. Not yet. I drifted through the crowd, listening. Every introduction Madison made included some version of my job. Each one spun to sound a little less impressive. At one point, she didn't even call me a mechanic. She called me a local handyman for cars. The thing was, she wasn't just joking, she was branding me. To her colleagues, I was a prop, the humble, grease-stained partner that made her look even more polished. Trevor caught my eye from across the room. He gave the smallest nod, like, "You hearing this?" Oh, I heard it, and I was already planning my next move. I waited until she saw me. The flicker in her eyes was quick, but I caught it. "That you weren't supposed to be here, look." She smoothed it over with a smile so fast no one else noticed. "Nolan," she said brightly, like we were the happiest couple in the room. "Everyone, this is my fiancée." The group turned toward me. Polite smiles all around. I shook a few hands, nodded, but kept my eyes on her. "Fiancée," I repeated. "That's interesting, considering what you've been saying about me tonight." The air shifted. She gave a laugh that sounded rehearsed. "Oh, here we go. He's sensitive about his job. I was just telling them how you're the best mechanic in town." "That's not what you said," I shot back. "You said I'm small town, happy in my little bubble, that I don't need ambition." A couple of her coworkers glanced at each other. Trevor froze with his drink halfway to his mouth. Madison's smile tightened. "Babe, it's a joke." "You're twisting it." "No, you've been saying this for months, haven't you? This is your little office hobby, painting me like I'm some charity case you took in." Her cheeks flushed. "Nolan, not here." "Why not? You had no problem talking about me here." She leaned closer, her voice dropping low but not low enough. "You are making a scene, and this is exactly why I don't bring you to these things." That one landed. People heard it. I saw it in their faces, the shift from polite amusement to awkward discomfort. I didn't explode. I just stepped back and said, "Thanks for clearing that up." And I left her standing there, every eye in her circle still on her. I didn't go straight home. I drove to the shop, unlocked the side door, and sat in my office with the lights off. I needed quiet to think. Madison's digs weren't random. They were too consistent, too practiced. You don't repeat the same lines unless you're using them for something. Round midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Trevor. "If you want to know why she does it, meet me tomorrow, not at the office." The next afternoon, we met at a coffee shop on the edge of town, far from her coworkers. He looked tense, like someone might walk in any second. "She's been using you," he said, leaning in, "not just to make herself look good socially. At work." I frowned. "At work how?" Trevor explained that Madison's department was competing for a big account, a national chain of luxury dealerships. She'd been using her humble fiancé mechanic story in pitches, painting herself as relatable to the everyday customer, while still selling high-end dreams. "She literally has a slide in her presentation with a photo of you at your shop," he said, titled "From the Garage to the Boardroom. You're a prop, Nolan," a talking point. I felt my jaw tighten. Does the company know she's exaggerating or making stuff up? Trevor hesitated. "She tells them you've never run a business, that you're just a small-town tech. But I've seen your books, you own your place, you've doubled revenue in 3 years. She leaves all that out because it doesn't fit her from nothing angle." He slid a flash drive across the table. "Her latest pitch deck. Thought you might want to see it before she lands this deal." I pocketed it without a word. For the first time since that party, I felt a plan forming. Back at the shop, I plugged the flash drive into my old laptop. The folders were neat. Corporate 3 pitch, dealership deck, client notes. I opened the pitch deck first. Side 1, Madison smiling in a tailored blazer, standing in front of a car worth more than my shop's annual rent. Side 3 stopped me cold. It was me, at my workbench, wiping my hands on a rag, head down, mid-repair. I remembered that day she'd swung by for lunch and snapped a few pictures. She hadn't mentioned they'd end up in her company's files. The caption, "Meet Nolan, my fiancé. He represents the heart of American auto culture, small town. Hands-on, loyal to a fault." Slide 4 twisted the knife. While Nolan runs a simple garage, I've learned how to connect with customers like him and bridge that into aspirational sales. Simple garage. I'd rebuilt that place from a single bay to a full-service shop with 6 lifts and a waiting list of loyal customers. I clicked deeper. Notes to her team read like a script, emphasize contrast between Nolan's world and our clients. Leverage personal anecdotes for relatability. Don't oversell his business, keep him humble. The more I read, the more it felt like she'd been staging our whole relationship for this narrative. Even the grease under his nails line from the party was in there, word for word. By the end, my hands weren't shaking anymore. I wasn't embarrassed. I was angry. She'd turned my life's work into a character she could control and profit from. And now, thanks to Trevor, I had her exact words in her own files. I knew one deck wasn't enough. Madison could claim it was just marketing fluff, spin it into harmless branding. I needed something more: emails, meeting notes, anything that proved intent. Trevor had told me Madison often worked late at the office, that on Fridays she left early for her networking drinks, which meant for at least 2 hours, her desk sat empty. That Friday, I drove downtown, parked 2 blocks away, and waited until I saw her walk out in heels and a camel coat, phone pressed to her ear. I gave it 5 minutes, then walked in like I belonged there. Her office was exactly what I expected: neat, curated, all clean lines and curated photos, but the real gold was in her desk drawer: a slim black external hard drive, company issued, labeled with her initials. I slid it into my jacket and was almost out the door when I heard voices down the hall. I ducked into a small meeting room, heart hammering, praying no one decided to come in for a quick chat. When the hallway cleared, I moved fast. By the time I got back to the truck, my palms were damp, but the drive was in my bag. Back at the shop, I plugged it in. It wasn't locked, just folders by date. Inside one marked dealer pitch notes. I found recordings, full audio from client meetings. In one, Addison told a table of executives, "I know the small town market. My fiancé is practically a case study. He's content where he is, not chasing growth. That's why I understand how to appeal to that demographic." Every word was crisp, time-stamped, and saved. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was her building a career on the back of my name by rewriting who I was. By Monday morning, Trevor's texts went from quick replies to hours-long gaps. When he finally messaged, it was short: "Can't talk right now, sorry." That wasn't like him. I got my answer that afternoon. A silver sedan pulled into the shop, Madison in the passenger seat, Trevor driving. They didn't come inside. They just sat there talking. She was smiling. He looked stiff, but not enough to get out of the car and warn me. 5 minutes later, they pulled away. I called him, no answer. Tried again, straight to voicemail. By evening, his number was blocked. That night, Madison showed up at my place. She didn't knock, just let herself in with the key I hadn't thought to take back yet. "We need to talk," she said. Her tone sugar-coated but her eyes sharp. "Trevor told me you've been asking questions." Snooping around my work, I kept my hands on the counter, steady. Funny, I thought Trevor was on my side. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. He realized getting in the middle of our disagreements isn't good for his career. "You should come to the same conclusion." I didn't answer. She glanced toward my office door, like she was checking if it was locked. "And if I find out you've been taking things from me, anything, I'll make sure it's dealt with at work and legally." The warning hung in the air. Then she left, the sound of her heels fading down the hall. When the door shut, I realized something. She knew something was missing, which meant my window to use it was closing fast. I didn't wait. The second she was gone, I went to my office and pulled the external drive from the locked cabinet. I plugged it in, ready to start copying everything to cloud storage. Only the folders were empty, every single one. I sat there staring at the blank window, my chest tightening. Yesterday, there had been hours of audio, hundreds of slides, notes stacked in neat digital piles. Now nothing but an empty directory structure, like the bones of a house that had been stripped bare. She'd found it, or worse, she'd had someone with it clearance wipe it remotely. I tried recovery software, same as when I'd helped a customer salvage a failing hard drive last year. No luck, not a single recoverable file. The phone rang, unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered, a man's voice, calm, professional. "Mr. Griffin, this is just a courtesy call. Company property was recently accessed from your IP address. We'd like to remind you that unauthorized use of proprietary material can have serious consequences." They didn't need to say Madison's name. By the time the call ended, I knew I was cooked. No proof, no ally, and now her story was probably making the rounds in her office. The insecure fiancé who tried to sabotage her career. The next day at the diner, the waitress, one of Madison's gym friends, avoided my table. 2 customers who'd been regulars for years canceled their appointments. Word was spreading. I'd been stripped of the evidence and cut off socially, for the first time since that night at the party. I wondered if she's already won. 2 days later, I was closing the shop when I spotted something wedged behind the office printer, a business card. Face down, I almost tossed it without looking, but habit made me flip it over. It wasn't just any card. It was from the OV rental company Madison's firm used for events. I knew because I'd helped carry their gear into our apartment once when she was prepping for a big pitch. That's when it clicked. Madison loved recording herself practice runs, mock meetings, even real presentations if she thought they'd make good portfolio pieces. She'd bragged once that the OV guys uploaded raw footage to a cloud server so she could download it anywhere. If she's used me as part of a pitch, there was a chance those recordings were still sitting in some folder she didn't control. I locked up and headed straight for the coffee shop with the fastest Wi-Fi in town. The company name was printed right there on the card, along with a generic Logan Portal URL. I tried her usual password patterns, the ones I'd learned from the first flash drive pull, no luck. But then I remembered she'd once complained that the OV guys forced her to create a password with a special character. So she's tacked an exclamation mark on the end. On the fourth try, I was in. A folder popped up, Bell Madison Pitches. Inside were video files, each labeled by date and client, and there it was, last month's dealership presentation. If the audio matched what I'd seen in her slides, this would be the kind of proof she couldn't erase or spin. I plugged in my earbuds and hit play. The video opened on a glossy conference room. Madison stood at the head of the table, navy dressed, confident smile, clicker in hand. The camera angle caught everything, the slides on the screen. The executives leaning forward, her pacing just enough to look dynamic. 5 minutes in, my face appeared on the screen behind her. Same workbench photo from the pitch deck Trevor gave me. This, she told the room, is Nolan, my fiancé. He runs a modest garage in a little town about 2 hours from here. No growth plans, no big ambitions. He's happy just keeping things running. She paused for effect, letting them nod at the charming simplicity. And it's people like him, she continued, who will walk into your dealerships not for the glitz, but because they trust you. I understand that market because I live with it. One of the executives asked about my shop. Madison laughed lightly. Oh, it's tiny, barely breaks even, but that's the point. He's not in it for the money. Every word was crystal clear. No one could argue context. No one could claim I'd twisted her meaning. It was her, on camera, presenting me as something smaller than I am as a sales prop. I downloaded the file, then made 3 backups, one on us, one in encrypted cloud storage, one emailed to myself this time. I wasn't losing it. For the first time in weeks, my pulse slowed. This was the evidence I needed, untouched, hosted by a third party, time-stamped and clearly tied to her professional gain. Madison had built her pitch on a lie, and now I could prove it. I didn't rush. Blowing this up in the wrong place could make it look like I was just a bitter ex. It needed the right audience, people who actually had a stake in her honesty. First stop was the dealership group's regional office. I called the main line, asked for the VP of marketing, and told his assistant I had information regarding a vendor's recent pitch. That phrase got me a meeting the next morning. That night, I also emailed the video along with still shots from the slides to Madison's company's her department. No subject line theatrics. Just documented misrepresentation of personal and business facts in client pitches recorded at a dealership presentation date. By the time I walked into the dealership's boardroom, the VP already had the video queued up. I sat there while he watched, arms crossed, eyes narrowing with each of Madison's lines about my tiny shop and no ambitions. When it ended, he didn't look at me. He looked at the marketing director beside him. This is the person we've been considering for the account. The director nodded, tight-lipped. The VP finally turned to me. Why bring this to us? Because she built her pitch on a lie, I said. And because if she's willing to misrepresent the person closest to her for a sale, you should know what that says about how she'll represent you. He didn't answer. That his expression told me I'd hit the mark. Walking out of that office, I knew the fuse was lit. Her would have that same video within hours. Madison wouldn't see it coming until the call came in. It happened faster than I expected. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Madison's voice came through, clipped and controlled. I don't know what you think you've done, but you've made a huge mistake. Call me. I didn't. An hour later, she showed up at the shop, not in her usual polished workwear. This time it was jeans, a sweatshirt, hair pulled back, no armor, but her eyes still sharp. You sent them that video, she said flatly. I didn't deny it. They deserve to know you used me as a sales prop. Lied about my business, lied about me. Her jaw worked, like she was holding back a dozen different arguments. Finally, she went with, it was marketing, Nolan. You're overreacting. Marketing isn't defamation, I said. You turned my name into a tool, built a whole persona for me that fit your pitch, and you never asked. She laughed, one short, bitter. You think this is going to ruin me? I've survived worse than a pissed-off mechanic with a thumb drive. Maybe, I said. But this time you're on record, a video, audio, timestamps, hosted by someone you can't bully or wipe clean. That was the first time I saw her flinch, just a flicker, but it was there. She didn't try to argue after that. She just stepped back, said, "You've made an enemy," and walked out. The door swung shut behind her, and I realized something. She wasn't worried about me anymore. She was worried about the people watching her now. 2 days later, I got a call from Trevor. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity won. They pulled her from the dealership account, he said. Word is hers investigating all her client pitches now. That video, it's making the rounds internally. I pictured Madison walking through her office. Smiles tighter, conversations cutting off when she passed. The image didn't bring joy exactly, more a steady, quiet satisfaction. By Friday, The local business blog ran a small piece regional marketing director under review for misrepresentation in client materials. No name, but anyone in her circle would connect the dots. The dealership up even called me directly. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention," he said. "We expect honesty from our partners." He didn't say it outright, but I knew she's lost the deal. That evening, a thick envelope landed in my mailbox from Madison's company. Inside was a formal letter confirming her temporary suspension, pending investigation, and a request for any additional information I wished to provide. I did not need to send more. The video was enough. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking up in the middle of the night replaying her words from that party. She'd tried to make me small to make herself look bigger. And now, the people she'd been performing for saw exactly what she was. The best part? I didn't have to shout my side of the story to anyone. The proof spoke for itself. A week after the letter, the shop phone rang. It was a customer I hadn't heard from in months, one of the regulars who'd vanished right after the diner gossip started. "Hey, Nolan," he said. "Sorry I've been Mia. Guess I heard some stuff that wasn't true. If you've got time, the truck's making a noise." It was a small thing, but it landed deep. That afternoon, I dug out an old framed photo from the back office, me, in front of the shop the year I bought it. Hands filthy, grin wide, engine block behind me. No caption, no spin, just me. I hung it right by the front counter where everyone could see it. Customers started commenting on it, asking about the early days, and I found myself telling the story without flinching. Without worrying how it sounded to anyone in a suit. One night, I stayed late, fixing a stubborn gearbox. Music low, I realized I wasn't thinking about Madison at all, not what she's done, not what she's lost. I was thinking about the next lift I wanted to install. The summer interns I'd promised to train, the fact that I still loved this work. She'd tried to turn my life into a punchline. In the end, all she did was remind me that I'm the one who decides how my story is told. That's the thing about voice, lose it for a while. And when you get it back, you guard it like hell. When I locked up that night, the air was cool, the street quiet. No one was watching, no one was judging, and for the first time since that office party, I felt the weight off my shoulders. I wasn't anyone's prop anymore. I was just Nolan Griffin, mechanic, business owner, and the guy who fixed his own damn story. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe to check out more stories on my channel.